setting. To answer the second part of your question, I think that part of the solution is creating and facilitating a more participatory culture in the church. Taking the best from what people are looking for online now, that sense of, I can have a voice, I can choose the song, I can customize my worship. That's what they do in the virtual church. Customize the worship, pick the songs, download the podcast sermon that they want to hear, pay online for a donation, and everything is about what I want. And part of that comes from the real need and desire to be a part, to participate instead of being what I would call a deaf mute, listening to a monologue every week. And please forgive me again, I'm glad you don't have any tomatoes, but listening to a monologue every week and being quiet and being deaf, being mute, just not being able to have dialogue with the teacher, the preacher, others. So I think part of the solution is not so much creating a model, but allowing for the kind of informal gatherings of believers. We alluded to that this morning, where not being afraid that, not being afraid to have a discontinuous sense of church, where that church meets or met in Ellul's home for a certain amount of years and it's no longer there. That's not a problem. Does the church have to be institutionalized? Does it have to be an institution? Or is there more freedom? Do we have more freedom to discuss the things of God together and bring the Bible out together and bring our worship together in a place that we rent or someone's home? So I think participatory culture is working towards solution for the church. Does that answer your question?
What would the preaching sound like? What sort of creed could you possibly formulate eventually, or would you fall back on the traditional Apostles' Creed, for example? Yeah. Or would you entertain the notion that this very Apostles' Creed, beautiful as it may be, poetically speaking,
yes. Well,
is something out of this world in the bad sense of the term? You cannot subscribe to it anymore.
well,
Let's try to take that as a good follow-up question.
Okay.
Because we do have two other hands up.
okay, I just want to say 4 words to that.
You go ahead.
Maybe it's 5. I would not say orthodoxy is wrong. We would keep the orthodoxy, and then let's talk about that later.
And
This interesting presentation is something I've thought about a while. I suspect a lot of people came here because of the internet. I've ran a network called Jesus Radicals, a bunch of anarchists who, you meet people who are off in North Dakota or wherever, they're alone. They go to church and they don't have that dialogue with their priest or their pastor. And so they find it online, and I'm loath to call anything like that church. But at the same time, I'm wondering what you see as a kind of proper use of the internet in the churches, that, agreeing that it needs to be incarnate, but what proper use is there of this?
Good question. I guess my main contention, and I think this would be Ellul's main contention, is that we not substitute whatever is happening online or whatever is happening using a certain technology with the gathering together of the believers, with Christ as the head, the actual human presence. Touch is the most basic, it's the primal way of communication. The study of haptics and nonverbal is one of my favorite topics. And Paul says, greet one another with a holy kiss. How do we even know what a holy kiss is if we're only, exchanging through messages online? We may be very inspired online, and I think that inspiration should continue. Any place that inspiration can continue, let it rain, let it go. But when we substitute and we say, this is the real thing, this disembodiment, I think, is highly problematic. It's problematic for communication, it's problematic to althea, it's problematic to dialogue. It's antithetical to dialogue.
your presentation and your answer were very specific to the virtual church. And so your answer was, well, we can't substitute for the church, something that's virtual. But I heard Andy kind of broadening things there and getting to perhaps something like, well, if 1/5 of the world's population is on Facebook, what does it mean to be in that world and not of it? right? So I don't mean to say that the church ought to be virtual, but it's something we ought to consider at a forum like this. You know, what is it? The world has Facebook. The world has Twitter. What does it mean to be in that world and not of it?
Right. Well, I'd like to comment on that. I think you're right, and I agree. That's why I'm on Facebook. And in 1995, I started a forum, a Christian discussion forum, and it's still going. I've met people and had people at my house from England and visited back and forth there. I mean, I'm not a technophobe, and I enjoy what the internet has brought. I just think that what has happened is, as it does with everything else, and as it continued, went back so many years, the idea of technology as solution or panacea for the church's problems is wrong-headed. It's wrong thinking, because it takes the incarnation out of our meeting. And if human presence, embodiment, was not important, I think God could have sent his message to us in a bottle instead of through Jesus Christ. You know? And so I think we should use, I'm like, Aristotle, all means of persuasion, use them all. But that is the rationale that you just articulated that can easily go over the edge into what I believe is wrong-headedness, because it's this, I've heard again and again in my interviews with pastors and lay people who are online, is that, well, there's the whole world out there and we have to be relevant. And the world out there needs to be evangelized. Do you know how many people are online right now and never will come to the door of the church? Right. Well, but what else is it doing? It's an environment that helps shape our consciousness. The online environment shapes the thinking about the church. It redefines the church. It shapes our consciousness. So that, I think that is problematic.
And I really want to invite Virginia's question, because we had 4 hands up at the beginning.
Yeah, I remember, I read the online version of the paper on Saturday, and you said something about you moderate a discussion list for people who attend online churches, and I'm wondering, because you started the paper talking about motivations, including convenience, but then in one of your replies you're talking about people missing the participatory angle, and I'm thinking, well, my own time when I was abroad in Thailand as a young person, in my early 20s, for a while I didn't know where to go to church, and I was listening to the BBC, and they have a church service every Sunday. I love listening to that because I could finally have church service. And then later on I found church services with real Thai people. But I'm thinking, I mean, you mentioned the homebound, how even though it may be wonderful to get that auditory experience, if you're homebound, that shouldn't excuse people that are coming to the church from visiting. But do you find people in your discussion group who are saying, I tried finding a church in real life, but I didn't live near anyone that didn't drive me crazy or something like that?
Exactly. Exactly. And there are multiple things that people say about why. Many, many things. We don't have the time to go through them now, but I'd love to talk about it later. However, my response to that is the transformation of our soul, according to St. Paul in Romans 12, needs to happen. How does that happen? I believe the church is the way that happens. When iron sharpens iron, and if you rub up against me and I rub up against you, and we don't like what we say, we have to either flee, go our separate ways, and let division happen, which happens constantly, or work it out. Sit down and have a dialogue. Learn to listen, and realize that the center of our fellowship, or our reason for gathering, is not a doctrine or a worship style, but is, as Ellul says, Christ, the person. And that works towards the transformation of our soul. We have to change. Their patience has to happen, or else we can't sleep.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.